Hey, what's up guys, Arva here, and welcome back to a brand new video here today. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the brand new F1 2019 sporting and technical regulation changes ahead of the brand new season. We did a similar video like this last year. I thought it was very useful for those casual fans who are maybe not completely clued in on all the new rule changes and kind of, maybe you need to query why certain rules are going to come into play. So hopefully I can try and clear that up for some of you guys. And then two, also, it was a really good forum basically to kind of discuss it in the comments below. So, there's always the kind of caveat with new rules every single year in F1 if they're going to be a positive or negative impact. The FIA bring in certain rules for a certain reason, and there's definitely a lot of questionability about whether it'll actually have that change. And so it's kind of cool to get your guys' opinions if you do think those changes will come into play. We had the major thing last year was the halo coming in. That was a big debate topic. Well, it was this year we've got a bit more of a actual aero change that will actually affect the airflow around the car and might even affect the racing. We're kind of hoping in a way. So let's kind of talk through all those technical regulations and any sporting regulations are also going to change for the 2019 season. So first of all, the biggest visual change you're going to see on this year's car is going to be the brand new front wings. So going from 2018 to 2019, the kind of mantra was simpler wings that can hopefully allow drivers to follow each other. That's the reason why we've simplified these wings. The FIA have done testing of their own with their own engineering group. They kind of, Ross Brawn, one of the heads of F1, has got kind of a team together of engineers to kind of do their own testing. And according to their simulations, this should help try and, negate that kind of dirty air effect. We've talked about it so many times before when we come to certain circuits, especially about that dirty air effect. Drivers just can't follow each other behind a corner and then, try and go for a pass. That's the kind of issue. So hopefully this will allow drivers to follow a little bit closer. But there's been huge debate about how much this is going to actually help. So that's the first thing. Let me know your opinions of if you think this is actually going to make that kind of change, or will we see pretty much changes that are going to be negligible over the entire season. But essentially, the layout of the front wing is simpler across the board. The flaps themselves on the front of the wing, and then the end plate's completely simplified, and then the wing itself, the entire span, has been widened to the kind of full width of the tyre. So we actually had that back in 09 to 2013, and then we went to these kind of narrower front wings that weren't as narrow as the olden days, like 07, 08. I'm talking about those were really quite tiny compared to the front tyres. But from 2014 to 2018, we've had these wings which are just a little bit inside of the front tyres. We've now gone back to the kind of full span, which some people debatably have been saying aesthetically doesn't look that amazing. I got used to them in 010 to 2010 to 2013, but then I kind of got used to again the shorter one. So I feel like that happens a lot with F1 fans. We kind of gawk at any changes aesthetically to the cars, but then you kind of mentally get used to it within a season or so. So the wing's width has been increased by 200 millimeters, so that will take it fully to the edge of the front tire. Now that in theory should try and hopefully negate the kind of need to really focus on turning the air around the front wing. That was a big part of why the teams wanted to try these very complex front wings. You saw a lot of time, and Mercedes were kind of the first pioneers of this kind of curved tunneling effect on the front wing flaps, and that was all to try and channel air and use it as a flow control device rather than a downforce generating device around the front tire to try and get that air scooting around. Naturally, a vortex will form on the top corner of the wheel just due to the front wing being there, the nature of the airflow around a rotating tire as well. But that kind of tunneling effect was trying to get that vortex even stronger if possible, because the stronger that vortex would have been, the better the cleanup will be of the turbulent air coming off the rotating front tires, and also just downstream trying to clean up in a kind of slipstream all the air as it goes towards the side pod area, the barge board area, and then eventually obviously will get funneled towards the diffuser on the rear end. So in theory, having the wingspan all the way to the edge of the tire kind of starts to negate the reason, necessity to have so much of that. But obviously at the same time, the FIA have kind of trying to kind of police that completely by simplifying the end plate as well. That is pretty much a spec end plate for most of the teams. There'll be little subtle differences maybe, perhaps, but most of it will all be spec parts across each single team now. The height of the front wing is also increased by 20 millimeters, so not a huge difference compared to the width, but again, that is an aid to try and stop the necessity of trying to basically make the entire front wing as a flow control device around the front tires. Having a higher front wing means it's a little bit easier maybe to jump the air over the front tires, and also that potentially allows to try and maybe get some downforce a little bit back because they've lost some with all the cascade elements taken away from the car. That's one thing. It'll be kind of weird almost when I do the technical analysis for the car launches. Obviously every single year when the cars launch, I like to do technical analysis of the cars, and then through the weekends you basically see so many different parts coming to the front wings usually. It'll be very odd now. We won't get those kind of elements of new cascade elements, new little winglets coming onto the front wing because it's all kind of illegal now. So there's no reason to develop that part of the car. So it will be a little bit odd, but I do suspect suspect that the teams will be going really hard in on the bargewood area and the side pod area to try and get back the downforce. We've already heard from insiders in the paddock that the top teams have already gained back the downforce. So, drivers like Sebastian Vettel, when the rules came in around Hungary, when they did the testing for those new front wings, drivers like Vettel were saying it's a little bit of a shame that we're going to get slower cars in 2019 due to these downforce changes based on the front wing. But the teams, in theory, have already gained back that down, or the top teams at least have gained back that downforce. It'll just be done in a bit of a different way. But the main thing here to remember is it's not about changing the downforce levels of the cars. It's to change the airflow around the car. That is the thing that changes how a driver can follow another. You can have the same amount of downforce, but if the airflow is a little bit different and affects the front wing differently when you follow another car, that is going to be the thing that allows more overtaking for this next season. And finally, the front wing is moved forward by 25mm, which, to be honest, straight away, the cars already themselves in 2018 were so long. We saw how long and boat-like the Mercedes car was getting, as well as the Ferrari, because they increased their wheelbase as well. And there was a good comparison picture, I think, over the winter period, or just the end of the season, showing the difference between the size of a 2018 F1 car and the 2008 F1 car, and it's just ridiculous. And so these cars are going to get even longer a little bit, depending on the wheelbase, and then you have this front wing kind of regulation change of it has to move forward by 25mm to give a kind of nice gap between the front wing and the front tyre. Again, trying to almost separate the interaction between the front wing and the tyre, and trying to get the emphasis away from that, because pretty much from 2014 to 2018, and pretty much a few years before, but it's been really concentrated from 2014 to 2018, the interaction between the front wing and the front tyre has been so important for the entire rest of the car because of the way the regulations were, and so they've now tried to kind of backpedal a little bit and try and undo some of that. I mentioned doing away with cascade elements on the top of the car. Something that's also going to be outlawed is the amount of streaks that are allowed underneath the car. So underneath the front wing, usually they have a few aero streaks coming down of carbon fiber. Those usually were maybe up to 4 or 5 streaks now. They're only allowed 2 now on the car. So really, the FIA have really clamped down on trying to simplify these front wings to kind of stop this kind of outwashing and really heavily emphasized part of the car, and trying to basically improve the racing. Obviously, like I said, a lot of the paddock insiders are kind of saying this is going to be very questionable how much this really helps, and it might be a tiny change. I've said in the past, in previous videos actually, over the winter, it may be a case of certain tracks see the improvement more. I think certain tracks like maybe Spain, Brazil, you might see a bit more of an improvement, maybe, because those are so affected by dirty air. But other circuits, it may be negligible. And also, certain circuits like Melbourne, I think, are just so horrendous at dirty air that you really won't see much of a difference. And obviously, Monaco is always going to be Monaco. So since we're talking about wings, we're going to go to the rear end now. The rear wing is changing as well. It's getting higher, wider, and simpler as well. So the big characteristic with the rear wings for the past, I don't know, about 8 years, I guess you could say, has been these little streaks on the edge of the end plate. Kind of pioneered by Toro Rosso at first, I think it was. And so those are being completely outlawed. So you will have a nice flat surface of the rear wing. So those streaks on the end plate of the rear wing were made to kind of bleed air across from one side to the other to the front wing and try and kind of diffuse a bit of pressure between the two sides. And that bleeding of air from one side to the other would try and help the rear wing work a little bit better, a bit more efficient, basically. And so that's going to be completely outlawed for every single team. And also at the same time, it's got a little bit higher and wider. Not massively, not as dramatically as the front wing, but you will kind of notice it a little bit that it has got a little bit higher and wider. And along with that, like I said, the height and the width has been changed. The height is going to go up by 20mm, so the entire kind of swooping up nature of the rear wing will get higher, and that's in a bid to try and chuck that air that comes off the rear wing to make it go higher, and so effectively maybe trying to chuck it up higher than the following car that's going to try and chase that rear wing, essentially. And also, like I said, the rear wing will be getting wider by 100mm, so not as much of a difference as the front wing, but still, it will be pretty noticeable that the rear wing will be kind of overbearing over the rear tyres even more now. So essentially, a higher and wider rear wing is basically a bigger rear wing and is going to punch a bigger hole in the air. So it will allow better slipstreaming potentially. And also on top of that, they have allowed the DRS opening to open more by 20mm. So you have that DRS flap being even wider when it opens up. So that makes DRS more powerful. And then on top of that, when DRS is closed, you're punching a bigger hole in the air. So that's all in a bid to improve the slipstreaming effect. So if you've obviously seen my channel, you've been a regular watcher, you'll know on the F1 game, the slipstream can be really powerful. a lot more powerful than it is in real life. They're almost trying to make it almost like it is in the game, trying to make that slipstream as powerful as they can, and so these are the first steps to do it. A bigger rear wing to punch a bigger hole, and then the DRS can be a bit more powerful. Now, that again is a debating point for you guys to maybe discuss in the comments below. What do you guys think of the DRS potentially being more powerful? You know, I've always been kind of like, I don't mind it too much as long as it's not ridiculously like them flying past and not even having to do any kind of work basically in the brake zone. But I know there's a lot of purists that just don't even like the sound of the DRS getting any more powerful than it is. At the same time, you've got to remember that's all going to be in conjunction with how the FI play the DRS zones and how long they are, if any changes are going to be made to the tracks for the DRS zone. So we'll have to see about that. But in my opinion, away from the DRS change, I like the change they made on the rear wing to try and just punch a bigger hole in the air to allow better slipstream. That in itself is going to create more natural overtaking, obviously when there's not a DRS straight. But then obviously that's going to be a big debating point about the DRS. So let me know in the comments below. So we'll kind of finish up the aero talk with the barge boards now. That's another area that's going to be changed, not as dramatically as the wings, I would say, but still you're going to notice that difference from a side-on profile of the cars because they're getting smaller and repositioned somewhat, a little bit more forward-facing almost, to try and also keep the airflow attached from the front wing. So the barge boards were a big part of 2018. You saw the likes of Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes really have these intricate barge board areas, and they became so intricate to the entire airflow of the car because the barge was obviously funnel air through to the side pod area and then eventually to the rear end of the car, and then in themselves as well chuck air down underneath the car where a lot of the aero work gets done on these F1 cars. A lot of the aero work is done pretty much where you can't see it underneath the car, and so the barge board area was very important for that with all these kind of dagger kind of edges like the Mercedes cars or the Red Bull with all of these slot gaps and very intricate winglets chucking the air left and right, down and up into intricate areas of the side pod. So the barge board area has been reduced in height by 150 millimeters. So you'll see what you saw in 2018, these huge kind of almost snowplow like barge boards on the sides. So now they've been really reduced quite a fair bit by 150 millimeters, and they've been moved forward by 100 millimeters. So moving that forward basically makes the job easier for the aerodynamicists to try and keep the airflow attached as it goes from the inside of the front wing and goes down the car through the suspension arms to the barge board area. If the barge boards are that much more forward, it's an easier job to attach the air and keep it attached as much as possible. And so the simpler front wings maybe aren't as much of an issue in terms of for them to tackle it. And so that's all in the bid to try and basically make their job a little bit easier, and so they don't have to go with these intricate designs, these bonkers spaceship-like winglets to keep all the airflow attached, i.e. going back to making the cars more raceable. It's all in a bid to make the cars more raceable. And I mentioned the airflow from the front of the car. Obviously, having a bit of a shorter barge board area as well is going to affect the flow downstream of the car, so the airflow will be affected through to the side pods and the bottom end of the car, and ultimately that's also going to help because they basically need to affect both areas. They need to affect how the car tackles air coming towards it, but then also how each car chucks off air from the rear end, because those two areas of the car will join up together in basically the air space between two cars trying to follow each other, and that will hopefully help racing get a little bit closer. And finally, the last technical change to the F1 2019 cars will be the brand new brake ducts. So brake ducts got quite complicated in 2018. We saw the likes of Mercedes and Toro Rosso have these very odd brake ducts with a lot of winglets. Sauber, Ferrari, all these guys tried very different brake ducts, little winglets here and there, and also they allowed airflow to come through the brake ducts straight through the wheel nuts to try blown wheel nuts. Those are being outlawed as well, so no longer will you see kind of holes in the wheel nuts. That essentially chucked air outwards and tried to clean up the air as it went downstream, kind of keep it all in a kind of box space of the car. That's going to be outlawed, and also this actual design itself will be simplified. There's no more winglets allowed on the brake duct. So again, that's in a bid to simplify the amount of aero going on in the car and hopefully allow better following, because all these things get affected by turbulent hot air off the engine exhaust gases and just the turbulent air coming off the rear wing of the car they're trying to follow. So if the car is basically less reliant on that air and a little bit less affected by that turbulent air, the better it's going to be for racing in theory. So again, that's what the brake duct simplification is to do with. So those are all the changes going forward for the 2019 season. The way they've gone about it and the kind of mantra why they wanted to do those changes, I'm all for that. It all sounds great in terms of improving the raceability. In terms of, in reality, how much of a difference it's going to make, it's going to be very debatable in 2019. I honestly think the biggest change we're going to have to wait for is 2021, of course, but that's still 3 years away. So 2019, let's keep our fingers crossed that it does make some sort of difference. But but these teams are so good, especially the top teams. They're so bloody good at getting back anything they've lost, basically, and the engineers are so smart that, you know, it's going to be very debatable. But I guess we're going to have to see when we rock up on the first, well, first of all, testing maybe, and then the real tester will be in the race conditions in the 2019 Australian Grand Prix. But now moving on to the sporting regulations as well. So this is going to be quite important, actually, this first one, for maybe more casual fans. So the tyre compounds. We had tyre compounds that went from super hard to hyper soft. So we had so many compounds, so many different colours, and it just got a little bit confusing for maybe casual fans. I'll admit, I could follow it along. I think a lot of you could follow it along, but I think for the casual fans, and that's one thing we are trying to do with Formula 1, is we're trying to grow this sport, because it is kind of a little bit kind of shrinking a little bit in the recent years, so we need to try and grow it a little bit more. And so to try and make it a bit more simplified, we're going to revise the tyre colours into basically just 3. So each weekend now, on every single car and every single commentator will be referring to the tyres, no matter what the racetrack, as the soft, medium, and hard. The soft tyre will be a red striped tyre, the medium will be a yellow wall, and then the hard will be a white striped tyre. So those are the new colour compounds you have to look out for. Red, yellow, white, every single circuit, no matter what, and they're called soft, medium, and hard. The actual compound, the rubber compound itself, will still be like it was last year, be a bit different every single circuit. So essentially, you know, going to a track like Spain will have a harder set of rubber compounds compared to Monaco. The rubber compound will be softer in nature, but the way we actually look at them on track, on the car, and the way we describe them will still be soft, medium, and hard. So essentially, it's almost like in the F1 game when you look at winglets. So again, apologies if you don't know what I'm about to talk about. It's almost like the F1 game. If you play the F1 game, every single track you go to, the front wing and the rear wing always has a changeability of 1 to 11, but the values of those 1 to 11, the extremes, aren't the same at every circuit. So, you know, 1-1 wings at Italy won't be 1-1 wings at Monaco, and that's the same way you have to think about it for the tyre compounds. The soft tyre compound at Monaco will not be the same rubber compound as it is at Italy, for say, or actually might be the same at Italy, but won't be the same at Spain. That's a better example. Won't be the same at Spain, to use the same exact analogy, but the actual way we identify them will be. So it's just less confusing, it's way easier to manage, and at the same time as well, might be easier for the teams to manage in a way as well, because I saw a few times at the back end of some seasons, teams just like McLaren just didn't even bother putting in their tyre allocations, because I don't know, they just ran out of time, they couldn't decide, they got confused, I don't know what, but there you go. But the actual rubber compounds themselves, by the way, will be denoted by C1 to C5. So C1 is the hardest type of rubber, and C5 is the softest. You don't need to really worry about that, but you might see commentators mention C1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to denote the actual rubber used. So like there might be a C5 as the soft tyre at Monaco, and then the let's say 3 might be the softest at Spain. You don't need to worry about that though. Just think about it as the soft, medium, and hards. So that's kind of the biggest sporting regulation. These other two are kind of a little bit smaller, but they're still kind of be quite important in terms of the job they do. So one of them is going to be rear wing end plate lights. So we saw the teams like Mercedes actually trial this in testing last year. These little tiny red lights that go on the edge of the rear wing, and they're going to help visibility in the rain. And so in doing so, helping that visibility in the rain will help safety as well. So it's almost like, you know, if you drive yourself in real life, it's almost just like that. You're on the road, you know, it starts raining, you have to put the light switch to basically have the red lights on permanently on the rear end of your car, not just when you're braking. And that's exactly what we're going to get with F1 cars now. They'll have small little tail lights. They'll only be noticeable really in the rain, basically, when the kind of, you know, the rest of the atmosphere is a lot darker. You might see them a little bit in the daytime, but it's basically mostly for the rain conditions to kind of help safety and visibility in that kind of aspect. Biometric gloves will be introduced to Formula 1 as well. So drivers are required to wear these biometric gloves, which basically send data back to the FI medical staff, I guess, basically. The sensors themselves are literally woven into the actual fabric of the glove. So it means if a driver gets in a crash, basically, let's say a driver is in a position where he can't get out of the car straight away, a la kind of Hulkenberg, I guess, the kind of actual biometric technology in the gloves will allow the FIA to see the driver's pulse, the kind of oxygen levels in his blood, everything like that, and so that'll tell them if he's kind of in any danger, and basically just give the FIA the vital signs if they need to really hurry it up, or if he's fine, he's good, you know, we need to make sure we get it back, you know, turn the car around the right way to not break his back or whatever, and just basically give them more data to carry out the jobs the FIA and the medical team do a lot better. And going along with the same theme of safety standards, in 2019, the helmets themselves will be stronger as well. There'll be more stricter crash tests for the helmets themselves, so the helmets will all get stronger because the FIA putting these new limits on the crash tests they have to do before the drivers can actually go out and use them on the grid. And talking about the drivers themselves, another big change, and this is actually quite a big one actually, I think, for a lot of drivers who are maybe a little bit taller on the grid. The car and driver weight will no longer be considered together. They'll now be considered separately, because it used to be a case of it was conjoined. So taller drivers like Hulkenberg or Ricciardo had to be a lot leaner than shorter drivers like, say, Fernando Alonso, because, you know, if you're taller, you're going to have more weight naturally anyway on you. And so they had to get so much leaner to basically get to the same weight combined with the car and themselves. But now they'll be considered separately. So no longer will there be a penalty if you're a taller, heavier driver by nature. The minimum weight now of the car without the driver has gone from 733 to 740 kilograms, which is a little bit frustrating. I think that's a big thing they have to try and change in futures of Formula 1, in my opinion. They need to get these cars way more lightweight, because the heavier cars, you can kind of tell in the corners, they're so sluggish. Yes, they've got the downforce to try and counteract that, but I think a lighter car will also improve, basically drivability, the maneuverability, and basically racing, in my opinion, I think. But anyway, going back to that number weight of 740 kilograms, 80 kilograms will be allocated for the driver alone, away from the actual car itself. So lighter drivers can maybe add ballast around the car, so they can maybe try and improve the weight balance. So lighter drivers still might have a little bit of an advantage, because if you're lighter, you can put the ballast where you want it to and try and improve the weight balance of where you want the car in terms of the balance on track. But heavier drivers won't be penalised anymore. They can go up to that full 80 kilograms and still be fine. And finally, the last sporting regulation has been increasing the fuel limit from 105 kilograms of fuel to 110 kilograms of fuel. So that will allow drivers to maybe push a little bit more in the race on full power on the engine mode, and maybe worry a little bit less about fuel. I mean, the cars were already fuel efficient, and a lot of the times, I didn't really think drivers were complaining too much about fuel saving, apart from maybe the Honda drivers in some cases, maybe the McLaren drivers as well. But this will just improve it a little bit more. They can use higher engine modes for longer in the race, and so effectively make the racing a bit more interesting for us, because they're going flat out even more. So that's been my overview of the F1 2019 sporting and technical regulation changes going into the new season. I hope you guys found it somewhat informative. If you didn't know any of those things before, hopefully I could clarify some of those things. Let me know in the comments below if I did do that. It'd be kind of helpful to know if it was kind of useful for you guys. And like I said, let me know in the comments below anything we discussed about that, your opinions on any of those rule changes, whether it be technical or sporting. Let me know in the comments below what you make of some of those things, and if you think they're a positive or negative impact on F1 as a whole going into 2019. Really excited for the new season. Obviously, we're only just about maybe a month away from the cars launching, so that's going to be very exciting itself. But guys, if you did enjoy the video and found it informative, then hit that like button. If you are new around here, do get subscribed for weekly full-on content. Usually we do F1 gaming stuff on this channel, but like I said, when the cars launch, I'll be doing technical analysis on each car when they launch, so do get subscribed for that. And I also do a podcast with my two friends once the season starts, so do get subscribed for that if you want to kind of have a new place to kind of discuss Formula 1. But yeah, guys, hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I've been Aaron, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.